Two men walk into the same coffee shop on a Tuesday morning. The first one pulls up in a leased BMW, steps out in a fresh pair of sneakers, orders the most expensive drink on the menu without looking at the price, and pays with a credit card that's already maxed at $11,000. He tips well. He looks good. Everyone in that coffee shop assumes he's doing fine. The second man walks in wearing a t-shirt that's been washed too many times to count. He drives a 12-year-old Honda that's parked outside with a small dent in the bumper he's never bothered to fix. He orders a plain coffee, pays an exact change, and doesn't tip because he genuinely doesn't have an extra dollar sitting loose in his pocket that day. Except that's not true. That second man has $340,000 sitting in index funds. He owns his car outright. He has 6 months of expenses saved in case something goes wrong. Nobody in that coffee shop would guess it because he doesn't dress like it, drive like it, or spend like it. The first man, the one who looked like he had it all together, is 3 missed payments away from his car being repossessed. Same coffee shop, same morning. 2 completely different financial realities, and almost nobody in that room could tell the difference just by looking. This isn't about how much money someone has in their bank account. It's about how well they've learned to hide their wealth from a world that's constantly trying to take it from them. I'm going to show you the 8 signs that someone is genuinely, quietly rich, even when everything about their appearance says otherwise. And once you understand these signs, you're going to start noticing something uncomfortable. A lot of the people who look rich are drowning, and a lot of the people who look like they're barely getting by are the ones actually winning. Rule 1. They drive the car for too long. Genuinely wealthy people keep cars long after it stops making social sense to keep them. Here's the math nobody talks about. The average new car loses about 20% of its value in the first year alone. If you're financing a $40,000 vehicle, you've essentially set $8,000 on fire before you've even made your third payment. Do that every 3 or 4 years, which is the average American car replacement cycle, and over a working lifetime, you're looking at easily $200,000 spent purely on depreciation, not transportation. Depreciation. The quietly rich person looks at that math and refuses to participate in it. They buy a reliable car, sometimes used, and they drive it until the wheels genuinely fall off. 10 years, 12 years, sometimes longer. But here's what most people miss. It's not that rich people can't afford a new car. It's that they've done the math on what a new car actually costs them over a decade, and they've decided the status isn't worth the price tag. The hidden consequence for everyone else is brutal. That money spent on constant upgrades isn't just gone, it's money that could have compounded. $8,000 invested at a modest return over 20 years turns into something close to $40,000. Every small upgrade is actually a much larger number in disguise. Just move 30 years into the future and quietly erased. Rule 2. Their home doesn't match their bank account. This one confuses people the most because we've been trained to think a big house means big money. Often, it means the exact opposite. A person earning $90,000 a year who buys a $550,000 home is signing up for a mortgage payment that eats a massive chunk of their take-home pay before groceries, insurance, or a single dollar of savings even enters the picture. They look successful. They are, in a very real sense, house poor. Every month becomes a balancing act just to keep the lights on in a home that's supposed to represent how well they're doing. The genuinely wealthy person often does the opposite. They buy a home that costs meaningfully less than what they're approved for. Sometimes it's the smallest house on the street. Sometimes it hasn't been renovated since the 90s. It gets worse for the person who overbought, though, because a house doesn't just cost the mortgage. Property taxes rise, insurance rises, something always breaks. When your monthly payment already stretches you to the edge, none of those additional costs have anywhere to come from except debt. The psychological trap here is powerful. We assume square footage equals success, so we chase square footage instead of chasing the number that actually matters, which is what's left over after the house is paid for. Rule 3, they don't talk about money, they ask about it. Watch how someone reacts when the topic of money comes up in conversation. The person trying to appear rich tends to talk. They'll mention the trip, the deal they got, the investment that's about to pay off. There's a performance to it, a need to be seen as someone who has it figured out. The person who is actually rich tends to ask questions instead. What made you choose that fund? How did you structure that? What would you do differently? This isn't just a personality quirk. It reflects a completely different relationship with money. One person is using money as a tool to manage information and identity, curating an image. The other is using money as a tool to solve problems. And problem solvers ask questions because they're actually trying to get better. Here's what most people miss about this one. The talking often isn't confidence, it's compensation. People tend to talk loudest about the areas of life where they feel the most insecure. Genuine security doesn't need an audience. Rule 4, they have an emergency fund before they have anything impressive. This is the least glamorous financial habit in existence. And it's also one of the clearest dividing lines between people who are actually secure and people who are one bad month away from crisis. An emergency fund doesn't get photographed. Nobody posts a picture of their savings account sitting untouched at $6,000. It doesn't create envy. It doesn't signal anything to anyone. But here's the hidden consequence of not having one. When your car breaks down and you don't have the cash, you put it on a credit card at 22% interest. When you lose your job for 2 months and you don't have a cushion, you start liquidating retirement accounts early, paying penalties on top of taxes just to survive. A single unexpected $5,000 expense can set someone back years, not because the expense itself was so large, but because they had built no buffer to absorb it. The genuinely rich person built the boring foundation first. The impressive stuff, if it ever comes after. Most people do it backward. They chase the impressive stuff first and build the foundation never, which means every unexpected event becomes a small financial earthquake. Rule 5. They negotiate the small things. This one seems almost embarrassing when you first notice it. Someone with real money in the bank will still call their internet provider to ask for a lower rate. They'll still compare prices on something as small as a bag of coffee. They'll still return an item that didn't meet expectations instead of letting it sit in a drawer out of awkwardness. People assume this is a sign of struggling financially. It's usually the opposite. The habit of negotiating and paying attention to small costs isn't about the $20 saved on any individual transaction. It's about the mindset that produced the wealth in the first place. Wealth is rarely built from one enormous decision. It's built from hundreds of small decisions made consistently over long periods of time, the same way erosion shapes a canyon, not through one dramatic event, but through relentless, small pressure applied consistently. But here's what most people miss. The person who feels too proud to negotiate a bill because it feels beneath their image is often the same person quietly struggling to make the bill's total monthly payment. Pride around money is expensive. It costs real dollars to maintain an appearance of not needing to care about dollars. Rule 6. Their spending doesn't move when their income does. This is probably the most important sign on this entire list, and it's the one that separates people who build lasting wealth from people who simply cycle through higher and higher incomes while staying financially stuck. When most people get a raise, their lifestyle expands almost immediately to match it. A new car, a bigger apartment, more frequent dinners out. This has a name, and economists have studied it for decades. It's called lifestyle inflation, and it is the single biggest reason why so many people earning 6 figures still feel like they're living paycheck to paycheck. I'm not done yet, because this pattern compounds in a devastating way. Someone earning $60,000 who gets promoted to $90,000 but expands their spending to match has gained nothing except stress and a slightly higher tax bracket. The extra $30,000 a year, if invested consistently instead of spent, could turn to hundreds of thousands of dollars over a couple of decades. Spent instead, it evaporates completely and leaves no trace. The genuinely rich person treats a raise as a gift to their future self, not their current lifestyle. Their day-to-day life often looks remarkably similar whether they're earning $50,000 or $250,000 a year. The gap between income and spending is where wealth actually gets built. Close that gap, and it doesn't matter how much you earn, you'll never accumulate anything. Rule 7. They avoid debt for things that lose value. There's a distinction that wealthy people internalize early, and it's the difference between debt that builds something and debt that simply drains something. A mortgage on a reasonably priced home can be productive debt because the asset can hold or grow in value over time. A loan for an education that leads to meaningfully higher earning power can be productive too. But financing a vacation, a wardrobe, or a depreciating car with high interest debt is a completely different animal. You're paying interest on something that is either already gone or already losing value the moment you acquire it. Here's the part that stings. Credit card interest in the mid-20s compounds against you the same way investment returns compound for you, just in the opposite direction. A $5,000 balance carried at 24% interest, making only minimum payments, can take over a decade to pay off and cost you more than double the original amount in interest alone. The person who looks broke because they're not buying things on credit isn't missing out. They're avoiding the invisible tax that debt places on every future dollar they'll ever earn. Meanwhile, the person who looks successful because they finance everything is often paying a premium, silently, forever, to maintain that appearance. Rule 8. They know their numbers, exactly. This is the final sign, and it might be the clearest one of all. Ask someone who's struggling financially what their monthly expenses actually are, down to the dollar, and most people can only guess. Ask them what their net worth is, and there's often an uncomfortable pause. Ask someone who's genuinely built wealth the same questions, and the answer comes almost instantly. They know exactly what they spend. They know exactly what they owe. They know exactly what they own. This isn't because they're obsessed with money. It's because you cannot manage what you refuse to measure. Nobody talks about how uncomfortable this step is. Looking directly at your numbers, especially if they're not good yet, feels like facing a judgment. So most people avoid it entirely, which means they navigate their entire financial life blind, reacting to problems only once they've already become emergencies. The person who looks broke but is quietly wealthy has usually done the uncomfortable work of looking directly at their numbers for years. That clarity is what allowed every other habit on this list to actually function. You cannot build an emergency fund, avoid lifestyle inflation, or dodge bad debt if you don't even know where your money is currently going. Now think back to that coffee shop. The man in the leased BMW never looked at his numbers. He didn't need to, because looking good felt like enough proof that things were fine. Every dollar he earned was already spoken for before it arrived, split between a car payment, a mortgage on a house slightly too big for his income, and a credit card balance that kept sliding backward instead of forward. He wasn't rich. He was performing rich, and performances are expensive to maintain. The man in the 12-year-old Honda had done something almost nobody around him understood. Years earlier, he'd looked directly at his numbers when they weren't flattering. He built the boring emergency fund first. He let raises go mostly untouched instead of upgrading his life to match them. He negotiated his bills, avoided debt on things that lose value, and kept driving a car that worked perfectly fine long after it stopped looking impressive to anyone else. Nobody in that coffee shop could see any of it. Wealth, the real kind, almost never announces itself. It's not the sneakers or the lease or the confident tip on an expensive order. It's the quiet accumulation of decisions made consistently for years by someone who stopped needing anyone else to be impressed. The real question isn't who looked richer that morning. It's which one of them will still be standing in 10 years and which one is already starting to fall apart, one payment at a time, in a way the rest of the world simply hasn't noticed yet.